Hello and welcome to Tuesday in Parliament. The main news from Westminster. The judges have spoken. It's up to Parliament to make a decision on triggering Brexit.
I can announce today that we will shortly introduce legislation allowing the government to move ahead with invoking Article 50, which starts the formal process of withdrawing from the European Union.
Some MPs want to be clear about what they would be voting for.
I would like a white paper which we could debate. It will bring us together, I would say to my right honourable friend. What has my right honourable friend got to lose with a debate on a white paper?
Also on the programme, the government's refusing to talk about a failed Trident missile test, but there are other sources.
I could probably phone up Mr. Putin. I did a favour for him once rescuing his submariners when they were drowning and ask him what it is, and I'm sure he'll tell me.
He'd probably give us a film of the launch as well.
Well, I don't know about that, but he certainly would be able to know the date.
But first, the Supreme Court has ruled that Parliament must grant formal approval before the UK government can start the process of leaving the European Union. Explaining the decision, contained in a 96-page judgment, the President of the Supreme Court, Lord Neuberger, said withdrawal from the EU would affect a fundamental change and alter legal rights. He said that such changes to the UK's constitutional arrangements should be clearly authorised by Parliament. Having lost the court case, the government was quick off the mark with its next move. The Brexit Secretary, David Davis, revealed that a bill would be introduced within days.
This government is determined to deliver on the decision taken by the people of the United Kingdom in the referendum granted to them by this House to leave the European Union. So we will move swiftly to do just that. I can announce today that we will shortly introduce legislation allowing the government to move ahead with invoking Article 50, which starts the formal process of withdrawing from the European Union.
He said the bill would be straightforward.
It's not about whether or not the UK should leave the European Union. That decision has already been made by the people of the United Kingdom. We will work with colleagues in both houses to ensure this bill is passed in good time for us to invoke Article 50 by the end of March this year.
This is a good day for parliamentary sovereignty. The Supreme Court has ruled that we shall have a say in this House on the Article 50 issue. Given the issues involved, that is quite right, and the Prime Minister was wrong to have attempted to sideline Parliament in this process. This bill is only to be introduced because the Prime Minister has been ordered to do so.
He said it was a question of substance, not process.
Last week, the Prime Minister committed herself to swapping the known benefits of single market membership and the customs union for the hoped-for benefits of a free trade agreement, with a fallback position of breaking our economic model. That is high risk, and there are big gaps, inconsistencies and unanswered questions in the Prime Minister's approach. Mr. Speaker, if the Prime Minister fails in her endeavour, the cost will be borne by families, working people and communities throughout the UK. The stakes are high, and the role of this House in holding the Prime Minister and the government to account throughout the process is crucial.
The Supreme Court ruled that the administrations in Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales do not need to be consulted before Brexit is triggered, but the SNP still welcomed the main judgment.
There was a time when the Secretary of State himself was a great champion of parliamentary scrutiny back in the dim and distant past. I'm sure that deep down inside he will be welcoming this judgment as well. And I'm wondering why they fear parliamentary scrutiny. Is it because they might be found out? Is it because we'll find out that the Emperor in these circumstances has no clothes? Because they talk of democracy. And as a gentle reminder in terms of democracy, let me remind the Secretary of State of this. That when it comes to Scotland, the Conservatives got their worst result in the general election since 1865. You have one MP.
Will the Secretary of State now agree to accept the unanimous recommendation of the Brexit Select Committee and in the process agree with himself before he got this job and now publish a white paper on the government's objectives so that these can be considered alongside the legislation that he has just announced? Because if the government does not do so, then I have to say to him, it will be showing a lack of respect for this House of Commons.
I don't often disagree with myself, but let me say this to the honourable gentleman. Right honourable gentleman. The speech given last week by the Prime Minister was the clearest exposition of a negotiating strategy I have seen in modern times. It laid out very clearly what we judge the national interest to be, how we intend to protect it, what we want to do, what we hope does not happen, and how we're going to go about avoiding that too. So I don't see that this government has avoided answering any question, either from his committee or indeed from the front bench.
Does the Minister accept that the public, in my view, that the public want us to get on with this and actually carry out what they voted for? But does he also accept too that the public will not look lightly on amendments that are being brought in, particularly by parties that actually want another referendum, to delay unnecessarily, but do want perhaps amendments that clarify and make us all more aware of the government's intentions?
If someone votes against sending the Article 50 letter, aren't they voting against restoring the very parliamentary sovereignty that they call in aid? Doesn't the British people want a proper parliament, not a puppet parliament answering to Brussels? And doesn't that require sending the letter soon?
I would like a white paper which we could debate. It will bring us together, I would say to my right honourable friend. What has my right honourable friend got to lose with a debate on a white paper?
Let me say this to the honourable lady, and she holds passionately a very well-formed view on these matters, that firstly, in terms of bringing people together, a large part of the Prime Minister's speech was aimed at creating a sense of this country which everybody can get behind.
David Davis. And later in the programme, we'll hear what the House of Lords had to say about the Brexit judgment. Now, MPs have been told that the government's refusal to confirm reports of a failed Trident missile test may be due to pressure from the United States. The Defence Secretary, Sir Michael Fallon, has declined to discuss any details of a test reportedly carried out in June. He told MPs that the government had absolute confidence in the UK's nuclear weapons system. Appearing before the Defence Committee, a defence expert suspected there'd been a problem with the missile's guidance system.
American sources only now reported in the American press and on CNN that the missile, quote, had to be diverted into the ocean to self-destruct, which suggests that it may have been heading for land if it had to be diverted into the ocean, if that statement is technically correct. So it does suggest, if that is true, that there was a fairly major telemetry failure, that the missile may have not just been uncertain in its flight, but may have genuinely been going on the wrong track.
Professor Clark said the missiles were made by the US firm Lockheed Martin.
So there have been 161 successful tests since 1989. Now, there were 5 failures before 1989 when the missile was in a bigger testing phase. So in total, there have been 6 failed tests, 5 of them before 1989, and 1 of them since then, which is the 162nd test failed. Lockheed Martin are certainly, I think, embarrassed about this, and there has been a certain amount of journalistically reported pressure from the United States on the British government not to say too much about this, because clearly it must worry the Americans as well. You know, 1 failure out of 162 is very small, but the fact that it has never failed before may raise questions about the adequacy of the checking and the manufacture.
Also appearing before the committee was a former head of the Royal Navy, who's also been a security minister. He said missile tests were not carried out in secret.
First of all, we have to inform all of the aviators, civil airline people, because it's a firing across the Atlantic. And also, we have an agreement that whenever we do these sort of firings, whether it's an American firing, our firing, whoever, we warn Russia so they don't think we're starting World War III. So they're very well aware this is all going to happen.
We don't even know what date the test took place on, but I have heard a suggestion that it was on the 20th of June. Are you in a position to know whether that happened?
I absolutely don't know.
Okay.
I don't know the date of it, but I see no reason I personally can see no reason whatsoever not to do that. I can tell you, we could go and I could probably phone up Mr. Putin. I did a favour of him once rescuing his submariners when they were drowning, and ask him what it is, and I'm sure he'll tell me.
He'd probably give us a film of the launch as well.
Well, I don't know about that, but he certainly would be able to know the date.
Would you have thought it at all likely that if a missile firing had gone wrong, as this one apparently did, that such a matter could be kept secret, given the number of observers who would have seen what happened?
I think anyone who thought that could be done was being very stupid and foolhardy.
It's all very well being upfront and transparent about these things, but we have agreed there is a sort of relative scale of transparency, that certain things we can't be transparent about.
Absolutely. For example, all the trials we did with the Type 45 circuit shoot-down ballistic missile, you don't tell anyone about any of that. Of course you don't. I mean, we all understand that. But this is quite a, this is a big bonanza occasion. We do this once every 4 years. It was inevitably going to come out. If anyone thought this wasn't going to come out, then they were in cloud cuckoo land.
And back to Professor Clark.
Do you think anything that we have discussed in our two sessions today has in any way undermined the secrecy or security of Britain's nuclear deterrent? And can you think of any good reason why a similar discussion couldn't have been held on the floor of the House of Commons yesterday?
No, absolutely not, Chairman. There's an old rule in politics, which you'll know very, very well, that it's not the failure that does the damage, it's the cover-up, or a perception of cover-up. And in this case, I agree with Admiral West. This whole issue is not in any way undermining the deterrent. It may be doing damage to the government because it's not been handled particularly well.
Now, violence in prisons is an old problem, but it's escalated in recent months. The prison service is on a major recruitment drive, including a new graduate scheme. Some jails are experimenting with novel ways to tackle violence, such as paying inmates to manage the behaviour of fellow prisoners.
To be fair to the government, I appreciate that prison violence has been a problem in our prisons for decades. I remember being a PPS 28 years ago, and the Home Secretary was coping then in the Home Office with a prison riot. But was it really wise to cut the number of prison officers by a quarter in the last 6 years, given these problems?
Well, I'd be delighted to have a conversation with my honourable friend about his experience looking at these issues, because he's absolutely right. They have been a problem for a number of years, and it will take time to build up the front line and recruit those 2,500 additional officers. But what we have faced recently is new challenges with psychoactive substances, with drones, with mobile phones. We're taking action to deal with those, but it is vitally important that we have the staff on the front line who can both reform offenders but also keep our prisons safe.
6 major incidents in 8 weeks is unprecedented in the 25 years I've been in this House. So, following on from the honourable gentleman from Gainsborough, would she confirm that the figures to September meant a loss in that last year of 417 prison officers? And when she says she has to recruit 2,500, does she not mean in the next 12 months she has to recruit 4,000 to meet those 2,500? And does she intend to do that?
Well, the honourable gentleman is absolutely right. We do need to recruit 4,000 officers over the next year. I announced initially that we were recruiting officers for the 10 of the most challenging prisons. We've already made job offers to almost all of those 400, so we are making good progress. We've recently launched a graduate scheme, Unlocked. Within 24 hours of announcing that scheme, we had expressions of interest from over 1,000 candidates. So there are people interested in joining the prison service. It is challenging to recruit those numbers of officers, but we're absolutely determined to do it, because it's what we need to do to be able to turn our prisons round and make them places of safety and reform.
Some prisons, including Her Majesty's Prison Birmingham, use prisoner violence reduction representatives to discourage disorder. These are prisoners who are paid to monitor other inmates. Stakeholders we have spoken to suggest that some are ensuring compliance by themselves meting out violence to troublesome inmates. What assessment has she made of their use?
Well, the Honourable Lady refers to those violence reduction programmes, and I've seen them in place in a number of prisons where they can be very effective, because often it's peer-to-peer support that can help turn prisoners around. However, they need to be carefully managed and monitored, and my expectation is that is the role of the governor of the prison to make sure those proper systems are in place. You're watching Tuesday in Parliament with me, Christina Cooper. Coming up,
what might happen if Parliament blocks Brexit.
There'd be no option for those of us who were in the majority and voted to leave other than to take to the streets and probably start breaking things.
The Home Affairs Committee is continuing its investigation into one of the big factors in the Brexit vote, migration. One Labour committee member said there was no point in setting net migration targets which couldn't be met.
I think there is broad consensus that, however you voted in the EU referendum last year, that there is a desire in all parts of our country for more control over our immigration system. But does it not undermine the sense of control to persist with a target you continually fail to meet? Well, Lord Green, because you were asked about that in the past tense. You supported it when it was introduced. How can you carry on supporting a target which, even if you take EU citizens out of the equation, government is not going to meet?
Has not met. Yes, we certainly have supported the target, and we continue to for these reasons. One is that it's a very effective means of focusing public opinion on an issue that we think needs some attention. Secondly, it introduces an element, if you like, of, can I call it, democratic accountability. So this is now firmly in the public mind. And I'm not sure it would be helpful for a government, whichever it was, to abandon it.
But with the greatest respect, Lord Green, what it is an effective means of undermining people's confidence in the system. And it's ludicrous to suggest that somehow it has helped achieve the target, because the target has never been met so far.
Well, it certainly underlines the failure of government measures to reach the target that they set. That's clear.
But what organisation sets itself up to fail year after year after year? That's a stupid thing to do, surely.
Yes, if that were the case, but I'm not sure that it is.
So they haven't failed year after year after year to meet the target?
I'm saying that in the future that may not be the case for a number of reasons. One is that the proposal that we make will reduce net migration by about 100,000 a year for a start.
Please explain to me why this government maintains this ludicrous target it cannot meet year after year after year.
I'm not in the position to do that because we've criticised the target ever since it was introduced, and we acknowledge the fact that actually, if we, it does increase transparency. That helps public accountability, and it also helps government understand what the objective is across government. However, I think it's created, a whole sort of set of quite perverse incentives.
A Conservative, Tim Lawton, said Poland had one of the best education systems in the EU and received EU funds.
So there is the absurd situation now that we are paying money to the Poles to educate to a high level their students in order for a lot of them, the high-skilled ones of them, to then leave Poland in a brain drain and come to places like the UK, where by and large they are employed at below their skill level. Now, that may be good for us, although having a turnip, somebody picking turnips in Norfolk with a PhD is a huge waste of human skills, but it's a net detriment, surely, to Poland. So free movement of labour to Poland, other than what funds may be repatriated by the person picking the turnips or being a scientist over here going back to Poland, may be beneficial. Hugely, surely this is completely unsustainable for Poland.
I think what you've described is pretty accurate, yes. Why not? Ideology. It was entirely this European fixation with free movement of goods, capital and labour that they were not prepared to shift, and particularly not prepared to shift when they were pretty certain that the Brits were going to stay anyway. They were wrong.
The Child Poverty Unit was set up some 20 years ago by the previous Labour government. It was run across 3 government departments: Work and Pensions, Education and the Treasury. But now it's part of the Department for Work and Pensions, prompting claims that the political focus on reducing child poverty has diminished.
The abolition of the cross-departmental unit is widely seen as downgrading and weakening the government machinery dedicated to the eradication of child poverty. Could the Minister explain how the abolition of a cross-departmental unit co-sponsored by the Department for Education is consistent with the government's own analysis of the root causes of poverty as partly lying in children's educational achievement? Because surely its own approach, which rejects what it calls a narrow income-based approach, strengthens rather than weakens the case for a cross-departmental unit.
Very good.
The purpose of the Child Poverty Unit was to measure those income-related targets set up by the previous government. And those targets were a waste of time, and we got rid of them. We've now set up something better, and that is the Social Mobility Commission Secretariat based in the Department of Education. And as I said in my original answer, the appropriate measure for these things should be parental worklessness, something a responsibility of the Department of Work and Pensions, and children's educational attainment, and those are the 2 that we will look at.
Last Labour government lifted 1 million children out of poverty. That record is unarguable. The Resolution Foundation has estimated that in 2016 alone, 1 million children extra will be forced into poverty, mostly from working households. How on earth can any government be proud of such a record, particularly one which says it's in favour of those who are just about managing?
On the measures that the previous Labour government set forward, we found that in a recession, the number of children allegedly in poverty went down, and when incomes were rising, it went up. It was not measuring the right thing.
And we end where we started, with the Supreme Court's ruling that Parliament must give formal approval before the UK government can start the Brexit process. The government will soon be producing a bill, which will have to be approved by the Commons and the Lords.
But this was a completely unnecessary legal procedure. If the government had brought forward the bill, which the court has now forced upon them shortly after the referendum, it would now be safely enacted, and much time, effort and cost would have been saved. It is, of course, a sign of the robustness of our constitutional arrangements that a private citizen can require the government, against its will, to play by the rules. But it's greatly to the government's discredit that this was ever necessary. Of course,
he explained what action the Liberal Democrats would be taking.
We will, therefore, be seeking to amend the bill to provide for a referendum to be held when we know the terms which the government has been able to negotiate. The government may have a mandate to start Brexit negotiations. It certainly does not have a mandate to impose harsh Brexit terms on the country.
In referring to the commitment of the government to work closely with the devolved administrations, there is an opportunity arising from the white paper published here in London yesterday morning by Wales's First Minister Carwyn Jones, with support from Plaid Cymru and the Liberal Democrats, based on the possibility of a single market linkage scheme. This might well meet the difficulties being faced in both Scotland and Northern Ireland. And will he give a firm assurance that the details of these proposals will be carefully considered?
Well, I thank the Noble Lord for that, and absolutely, it gives me a good opportunity to say yes. If he would like to meet with me to discuss them myself, I'd be happy to do so. I can also take this opportunity to say that the proposals issued by the Scottish Government are also being given careful consideration, and we will continue to cooperate and consult with those representatives of the Northern Irish Assembly and devolved administrations in Scotland and Wales.
Does my noble friend accept that if the Parliament accepted the advice of the noble Lord Harris and treated the referendum as advisory and decided that this country should not leave the EU, there would be no option for those of us who were in the majority and voted to leave other than to take to the streets and probably start breaking things?
Well, my lords, all I can simply say is that I very much hope that this does not happen, and I'm sure that there is, considering the comments made so far by your lordships and the very constructive approach that the noble Baroness Hayter has been making through this process, that we will avoid that.
This
bill that will come to us is essentially one about process and not outcomes. And the way in which we handle our processes is different from how we may argue about outcomes at the end of this whole 2-year period. And that the use of language, which may occasionally sound threatening, is very unhelpful if at the end of the 2-year period we are going to end up with a country that is able to go forward in a reconciled and prosperous and flourishing way. We need to take our processes calmly and quietly without issuing threats and with an eye to the unity of this country.
And that advice from the Archbishop of Canterbury on how to achieve a peaceful Brexit brings us to the end of Tuesday in Parliament. Do join me at the same time tomorrow for another roundup of the news from Westminster. Until then, from me, Christina Cooper, goodbye.